Hey everybody, it's Brett, and welcome back to another episode of Behind the Stack, where today I am sitting down with author Denne Michele Norris for her debut novel, When the Harvest Comes. Denne Michele Norris is the editor-in-chief of Electric Literature, which was the winner of the 2022 Whiting Literary Magazine Prize. She is the first Black, openly trans woman to helm a major literary publication. A 2021 Out 100 honoree, her writing has been supported by MacDowell, Tin House, and the Kimblio Center for African American Fiction, and appears in McSweeney's, American Short Fiction, and Zora. She is the co-host of the critically acclaimed podcast, Food for Thought. She is an MFA graduate of Sarah Lawrence College, and she lives in New York City. So please enjoy this episode of Behind the Stack. I'm really thrilled to have on Denne Michele Norris for her debut beautiful book, When the Harvest Comes. It is so wonderful. God, to just bring up a lot. And so, as I was saying before we started, I love to unpack a story, and this is truly a story and characters to unpack. So, thank you for being here.
Oh my God, thank you for having me. I'm so excited. I'm a big fan. Excited to dive in.
Okay, so I just have to ask you, I want to cover some bio ground before we get into the book. Wait, where you grew up in Ohio? Where in Ohio?
Cleveland Heights, Ohio.
Oh, okay. All right. I've become a little more familiar with Ohio because my son goes to Kenyon.
hmm
And so it's a very interesting place.
It is a very interesting place. I loved growing up in Cleveland Heights, Ohio. I have to say, it's a really lovely suburb filled with really very liberal, progressive, and artistic minded people. So it makes sense. Like people are always shocked that when I say I'm from Ohio, but yes, I'm a very clear Cleveland Heights kid. And I, until very recently, I thought I was going to move back there actually because my mom is still there. And I
Okay.
wanted this sort of quiet Midwestern life. And I'm still in New York, but I go back frequently to visit my mom, and I'm just sort of enchanted by the beauty. There's these beautiful, big, grand, houses that are not that expensive, and trees everywhere, and just really nice, wonderful people in Cleveland Heights. It doesn't totally feel like Ohio in certain ways, but it
Yeah,
is
yeah.
also very Ohio.
I get it. I totally understand. And you found your pocket. I also think as we begin to age, there's something becomes nostalgic for what we remember in a
hmm
lot of ways and for going back to something that's familiar. At least I find that.
Yes, absolutely.
So, okay, so you grew up in Ohio and then you ended up going, you got your, where did you do your undergrad?
So I went to Haverford College
Okay.
in Philly
Yeah.
for
Oh
my
my God.
undergrad.
We
Yep.
looked, we might, that was one of our choices for my son. It's an
Yeah.
incredible school.
I love that school. I still love that school. I love that community. And for me, it was kind of the first place where I felt like I was home outside of the house that I grew up in. Like I visited a bunch of colleges, and I felt safe and at home there. And that was what I needed. I had gone to this really conservative all boys prep school for high school
Mm.
that was not a great academically, it was great for me, but it was not a great place for me in every other way. And I really needed a school where I felt just very safe in my queerness, very supported. And I remember that when I was applying to colleges, the Princeton Review said that Haverford, it was easier to come out as gay than it was to come out as a Republican at that school. And at that time, that was absolutely what I wanted. And I suspect that is still the case at Haverford.
I think it was. Yeah, I think it was when we were there. That was
Mhm.
the first time that the tour guide came out and they started by using their pronouns. And I was like, okay, we're in this new world now. Here we go. And
Yep.
it followed suit for almost every university and college that we went to. But I loved Haverford. And my sister's in Philly. So it was also a boon because I thought, oh my God, he'll be close to her. And
Yep.
it just ended up Kenyon. But what a great school. And then you went to Sarah Lawrence. You got your MFA from Sarah Lawrence.
Yes, yes, I did. Loved that as well. I had a great experience. I was there with a number of really incredible writers. I was in fiction workshops with Tikira Madden, Nicole Dennis Ben, Bethany Ball, among others, and really was part of just a talented cohort of really good, wonderful, kind people. And I did it quite a while ago. It was 2010 to 2012, and so we weren't having all of the same diversity conversations. But what I tell
Mm.
people is that they're like I paid for my MFA at Sarah Lawrence. Like it's not a funded program. And that part was not ideal for me. But I was never even the only Black queer person in any of my classes. And that for an
Wow.
MFA at that time is really extraordinary. And I have a number of friends who went to smaller programs, funded programs, where if they were a person of color or queer, they were often the only person who saw the world like them, who was bringing their experiences to the table, and that really impacted the feedback that they got and the actual work that they did. And so, yeah, Sarah Lawrence was a very positive experience for me.
That's amazing. Okay, so bringing you up current, you are the editor in chief of Electric Literature. You're the first Black openly trans woman, which is incredible. You also have this hilarious, I got to be honest, hilarious podcast called Food for Thought. Have you stopped that? Have you guys like put that on pause, or has it stopped for now? At
Yes,
least for
food
now, I say.
Yeah, for at least for now, Food for Thought is on pause. We all are doing so many things where it
Yeah.
became kind of too much of a lift to keep it going. But we're still in touch. Actually, my New York launch is going to be a reunion with me, Tommy, and Joe, and we're hoping to record it and release it as like a reunion episode. So
Oh
we're
my
still
God,
in
that'd be so
touch.
much fun.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
is
it's going
so
to be a great
exciting.
time.
This goes back to something I wanted to ask you when we were just talking, when I was gushing about you before we started. I watched in one of these interviews that you had given that you said solitude is a very important thing to you and to give yourself the space to listen to you. So I'm so curious, based on how you present, who is like so gregarious, do you view yourself more as an introvert or an extrovert, or are you one of these people that is a introvert pretending to be an extrovert?
That is drag me. That's a really great question. I absolutely am on the inside more of an introvert, but I know how to give the people what they want, as they say, and I know how
Yeah.
to be extroverted. And there is a genuine part of me that is a very extroverted person. But it takes a decent amount of energy. It takes a lot out of me. It is natural, it's totally genuine.
Yeah.
But I absolutely, at the end of the day, am an introvert. I'm a quiet person. I love quiet, which is maybe the most important thing. And so I mentioned that I was maybe going to move to Cleveland, and I'm still in New York, but I just moved into my own apartment by myself for the first time, no roommate.
Mm.
And I was just texting with my former roommate, who's a really close friend of mine, and we were like, "How's it going for you?" And she doesn't love living alone, and I was like, "It's an adjustment, but I love it. Like I love it.
Yeah, you had to
It is
tamp it down. You had to tamp it down because the reality is you were like, I fucking love it, but I'm going to be like, yeah, it's hard.
exactly. It's moments of adjustment, but I don't even, how like most people in the world often they just like have the TV on, right? They just
Yeah.
have the background noise.
Yeah.
No, I don't even have a TV. I will get a TV because I want to entertain. But like I love as quiet as you can be. I love that because I need that to listen to myself, to understand my feelings, my thoughts, my questions. Not even necessarily when I'm writing, just to like be in the world. I need that
Yeah.
quiet. And so I am loving it. And my apartment is tucked away. It's on Riverside Drive and it's tucked away in this little
Mm.
block that's very quiet. It's close to the water. It's like very close to the parkway. Lots of sunlight. And if I like, boxes are everywhere. Like I
Oh,
just
yeah, because you're
moved,
just in. Yeah.
been just in, but I love it. I love the quiet.
But it's also that I look at it as you're refueling your tank. Okay. So on to the book. Do you have an elevator pitch for when the harvest comes?
I had one years ago when I was like trying to meet with agents and publishers and all of that, and I have lost it. But what I will say to people, like the sort of basic pitch is that I wanted to write a love story, and I wanted to write a love
Mm.
story where the person in the world that I sort of see as being one of the most like sort of systematically maligned people, devalued people, um, is in a loving relationship and in a situation where they are not moving through the world as though they are
Mm.
maligned, as though they are devalued, as though they aren't desired. They are sort of in the relationship with like the sort of archetypal sort of perfect guy, and that person is devoted to them, and they're the person who begins to kind of like fuck it up for I hope it's okay to swear, but For
No,
lack
it's
of
yeah, it's
other
fine.
language, they're the person who
This is
kind
the
of begins
children's
to
podcast. No, no, no. You're saying yeah.
yeah, they're the person who kind of begins to sort of just like throw a wrench into it because of their own stuff. And so it's about fathers and sons, it's about sex and sexuality and identity, and gender, and it's about, coming to terms with who you are and finding love for every part of yourself.
So here's my question: when did this start to percolate for you, and where did it stem from? And what I'm really curious about is if it aligned in terms of your own journey with your gender and sexuality, and if this all kind of became this one cohesive thing for you.
Um, so this novel began 14 years ago.
Wow.
Um, it did not begin as a novel. I was in the middle of my 2 years at Sarah Lawrence, and my father had died when I'd gotten to Sarah Lawrence, and a month into my MFA, my father died very suddenly.
Mm.
And you know, I spent the rest of that first year kind of writing in a bit of a haze. I was very productive. I wrote a lot, but I rarely revised anything. I would just write a short story and move on to the next one. And I knew that there was something that wasn't quite working in my fiction. And I just thought maybe I should just throw in the towel on this dream and go to law school, which is always my sort of like backup thought, is that I could go to
Mm.
law school. But over the summer, I was accepted into two workshops for the summer. And one of them was a workshop called VONA, Voices of Our Nation's Arts, which is exclusively for writers of color. And I went to that workshop, and my instructor at the time, Evelina M. Galong, said, "You're in the closet on the page," which had a really profound effect on me. And I thought to myself, what if I wrote something that I didn't have to worry at all about fictionalizing it or looking up anything, that was something that was so sort of personal to me, that I could just focus on the emotional aspect of it, of just
Mm.
putting the heart into it and not think about anything else. And so I started writing a short story where a couple has to move their mother who has Alzheimer's into their home. And because she has Alzheimer's, she forgets who they are and forgets that they're a couple and all of those things. And it very quickly changed, but that was the beginning. That was the beginning of this novel. Um, and from there, it just took me a long time to write it. I was very young. I had to learn how to live in the city, pay a bill on time, get a job, build friends, and build a life. And so it took me a long time to sort of finish the book. But it really came from this project of trying to like what was sort of deepest inside of me and figure out how to put that on the page. I was tired of writing fiction that I didn't care about. Um, but I didn't care about it. I would write, I only revised things to hand them in at the end of the semester. I didn't care about anything that I was writing. And I was like, I got to figure this out. Otherwise, I'm not going to write anything that's worth anyone's time to read. And so this grew from that. This novel grew from that.
Wow. Now I'm just so curious, that original novel about the couple, because that sounds amazing to me too. Do you think you'll ever go back to that?
It's possible. It's possible. I have a few different ideas that are percolating, and I'm trying to figure out. I think I know what's coming to the fore right now, but it's possible. It is very
It's just a
possible.
great like launch off kind of pitch idea. Like I love that idea. Also, I think you just described my life. But no, but I was like, "Oh my God, that sounds amazing." That's incredible. So let's get into the book with the start of like Davis is the centerpiece of this thing. He is this brilliant violist. He has this past that's somewhat traumatic that slowly gets revealed as the story goes on, which we're not going to give any spoilers. Um, he you describe him many times in the book as he's small, like his physical stature, that he's small, he's beautiful. I loved all of this. I loved when he talks about playing the viola. I love that whole backstory with how that came into his life between his mother and his father. And the way you write about his freedom within the form, so to speak, of music. Do you find that same thing with your writing?
That is such a great question. I would say yes, I do. I think I was
Mm,
drawing from the way that I think about writing when I was writing about the viola. I think for me, the way that I look at the practice of writing, and I often use that language like it's a practice, is that it is my freest place other
mm,
than inside of my mind. And it's writing that is how I get into my mind or how I extract from my mind. So So it's transportive in a way, but it is absolutely for me that free place where I feel like there are no rules, and I can do whatever I want. No one gets to tell me what to do, which isn't to say that I'm resistant to edits and sort of a difficult writer to work with in that way. I love that work actually, but it's the place where I can just do whatever I want. And it can seem like I'm doing something that's unrealistic, or it can seem like I'm doing something that is unbelievable, or that I'm doing something that a writer has to like find a way to pull off, so to speak. But the core of it is imagination. And, the core of, I think, the world that we live in also in many ways is imagination. We live in this country because someone imagined that governance could be done in a different way, right? And like, I mean, I'm not saying, listen, I'm not saying that it's perfect, but like
Yeah,
we're
right.
where we are on this earth because of imagination. And so for me, it's like I get to take what I imagine the world to be or what people to be, and I get to put it on the page and make it real in a way. And if I can make it real
Mm,
on the page, then it can become real in the world. Absolutely, writing is my freest space.
I love that. I'd love to talk a little bit about Davis and his father, who is referred to almost primarily both by Davis and his sister Olivia as the Reverend, not Dad, which I found just a fascinating choice for these two characters. Can you talk a little bit about that relationship? Because one of the things that is so on the nose to me is the dynamic with, I think, with, look, any kind of parent child relationship is complicated, but I do think, as anyone on the queer spectrum, a relationship with a father per se is kind of like it, it's double, quadruply complicated in my mind.
Yes, yes. It's so funny because I think the way that I've written the book, it's easy to see Davis and Everett as the center of the book, and there are ways in which they are. But for me, the beating heart is the relationship between the Reverend and Davis. The thing that I kept thinking about in the early days of writing the novel was how, my father was a minister too. So that there's
Mm.
a connection there. And that meant a challenging and fraught relationship and family dynamic for me when I was growing up. Although it was also
How
really,
many siblings do you have?
I have two sisters and a brother, and they're
And
all older than
where do you?
me.
Okay, so you're the baby.
I'm
Okay.
the baby, and I'm the baby by a lot. I was like a
Mm.
caboose baby.
I'm the same thing. Yeah.
It's there's a lot of fun things about growing up in that way. But I remember when I was coming out in high school, people would always tell me how brave I was. And there
Mm.
was a real instinct to sort of villainize my family because it was not an immediate, like, we're so excited that you're gay, yay. They were not PFLAG parents. And I didn't know a different family. I didn't know a different life. And I understood how much my parents loved me and cherished me, and how their reaction to my sexuality was a product of their love in some ways,
Mm.
and a product of like misunderstanding, misinformation, all of that, sure. But like they loved me very, very much. So I never wanted to write a book that solely villainized this relationship. I wanted to capture the fullness of what goes on between this father and his child. I wanted to capture the intense love that this man has for his child. And I wanted to capture Davis's ability to recognize that love and factor that
Mm.
into everything that's happening at this moment in his life.
Yeah, and there's also, look, it's very spot on and very realistic in terms of, it's not a spoiler to say that his father's in a terrible accident that starts at the beginning of the novel, which propels a lot of Davis through the story. I remember when my own father passed, and it was very sudden, like yours. And my brother worked with my father.
Mm.
They had a very fraught relationship. And so when my father died, it was incredibly hard on my brother because There was so much that was left unsaid, and that's what speaks in this book as well, on both sides, right? So there was so much truth in what you're writing in terms of how it affects Davis going forward and what that means and how complicated it is. It really is.
Oh, thank you. That's amazing to hear because that was a big part of my sort of vision for this book from the very beginning. These things, these complicated relationships, these tensions, these things that are never spoken, they reverberate often the loudest for us, in part because they're in our head and they're often never excised. And so part of the time that this novel took me was being able to articulate those things,
Mm,
being able to figure out how they work for Davis in this novel and how they reverberate into the other aspects of Davis's life as well, and how they navigate it and how they begin to maybe see their way through it. And so, I think these are challenges and questions and tensions that we eventually maybe were able to kind of step away from, or they move into the background as the focuses of our lives change and evolve and grow. But I don't know that they ever disappear. I think they're always
sure.
there. And so, I was hopeful that the book would sort of show that, even as, there's so much happening around it.
Yeah, and I don't listen. It's also these ideas of gender and sexuality. It's not even limited to just them because I look at very much Everett's relationship with his father, who, on the page comes off as this very liberal, very accepting man. But there are still these things, right? And there are still these, for lack of a better word, prejudices that exist that even if you think that you're so evolved, so to speak, what might come up? Especially when phase two with the difference between sexuality and gender identity, right? Those
Mhm.
move in and they move like kind of simultaneously, but reactions to those things can be very, very different as we're seeing right now.
It's
And so I just think it's really interesting how these ideas of gender and sexuality affect so many of these characters in a lot of capacities. There's a big part about Davis too, where because he's described as, again, I talked about his size, but he's so beautiful, it's a kind of a commingling of shame with desire that happens, which I think is really fascinating. You have a line where he talks about the mix, and it's someone referring to him and what he brings out in people. It says the mix of the buried desire and the illicit release that's granted. Oh my God, I thought that was such a beautiful line, and it's so on the mark. It immediately spoke to me of every single closeted person, every single person who doesn't understand what they're recognizing, but Davis completely understands both his appeal and the power of that, and also the shame surrounding it.
Yeah, I think, first of all, thank you for recognizing that. That's another thing that I was really sort of wanting to explore in this book, wanting to explore the ways in which queer people like often have to deal with that commingling around how we're received and how we navigate that and how we, sort of move past that as well. And that was something that in the writing of it happened a little bit later in the process. Like that's I think that's a part of the book that I was writing towards the end of the process of writing the book. And so I had a lot of time to sort of think on it and sit on it. And I really wanted shame to be there because I think that we live in a society, and I certainly think that Davis was raised in a home, and to an extent Everett as well, where the opposite side of the coin of desire is so much of that sort of religious indoctrination and religious teaching about desire and about the ways in which we make our desire manifest is shameful, even in scenarios where, the object of your desire is not related to the shame, like sort of in a cishet
Right.
desiring, sexual desire situation, in lots of churches, like that's shameful unless it's marriage. And I remember going to a church Bible study once when I was a kid where they really were saying, like, even for married couples, they were only supposed to have sex to procreate, and anything beyond that was like sinful and shameful.
Right.
Right. So if that's the sort of way that you've been programmed, and for Davis, I would say that's the way that he's been programmed. What does it take to get through all of that? end up sort of disregarding that. So I felt like it had to be in the book somewhere, but I didn't want that to be the center of the book. I didn't want that to be the thing that is exactly at the center of the book, now, but I did want it to be something where this character who maybe thinks up until this point that he's like well adjusted and that he's figured himself out, all of a sudden is thrown into new emotional territory, and things that he didn't realize were there are coming up for him. And he's having to deal with them, and he's making connections, and he's thinking about, okay, this is where I am now, and here's where I was 10 years ago or 8 years ago. And these things that I thought I had figured out and buried are not gone. They're still
Yeah.
inside me.
Yeah. Um, and this is a good transition too, because you talked about when we started about Davis's, when you were describing the book, about his potential to sabotage this relationship because of feelings of, am I worthy? Am I attractive enough? Which again, is so relatable for so many people, regardless of who you are and what you look like. But okay, we have got to talk about Everett because I need you to put on your casting hat with me because this man, Everett, first of all, he is the perfect man. All right. He is the dream guy. He is gorgeous and tall and strapping and beautiful. He is an equal opportunity attractor. Women and men love him. I think straight men want to be him. Everybody else wants to do him. I mean, so I'm sitting there and I was pondering this and I was like, I just have to ask straight out. Who are you thinking of? Who was in your head when you were writing this character?
That is a great, great question. What's funny is that as I was writing him, I wouldn't allow myself during the writing process for so many years when I didn't know what would happen. I did not allow myself to cast these characters
Oh my
because
God.
it was
I want a
too
Pinterest page.
it was too scary for me. I was just like, I'm not even gonna get my hopes up about that. Now that it's done and and there is, we're trying to, figure out film stuff and agents and all of
Yeah.
that. I'm thinking about it a little bit. And so I've thought about Lee Pace as like my sort of number one person that I would consider for this role, or that I would think would
Yeah.
make a great one. I've also thought about, he was in The Greatest Showman and he's on Broadway right now, an actor named Timothy Hughes, who I
Oh,
think would
I
be
know
great.
Timothy well. I love Timothy. First of all, the sweetest man. And I remember seeing him in Hadestown
Hmm.
and being like, who is this beautiful specimen of a man? And
Hmm.
then seeing him one day walking down the street. I was having dinner in New York, and literally, that thing when you recognize the person and it doesn't, your brain almost isn't working fast enough, so you almost call out to be like, hey, like, even though I've never met you, but I suddenly know you. Yes. Well, that's a great one too. I love Timothy.
Yeah, I think those are the two. I don't know that I've thought too far ahead beyond that. There was someone recently that I saw and I was like, oh, he would be good, but I don't remember who it was. I could probably find it on my Instagram. But those are the two that I've had in mind that I think would work really well and would be just sort of like these characters who I also think, these actors who I think could really show the emotional range, because this is a guy who like really could so easily be a douchebag. Even like
Yeah.
as a queer man, as a bisexual man, could totally be like a douchebag, and he's not. Like, he has a heart of gold and he is so devoted to the person that he loves. And it's interesting. I saw a review recently where someone was like, the only thing I wanted in this book was a little bit more about Everett and his career. And, I think that's a fine critique or question to have. But for me, like that's not even really a part of the book, because he's just like, yeah, this is what I do, this is my job, this is how I make my money. But he, like, his interest, his energy is in his like life outside of his career. That's not a thing that is defining to him about who he
Right.
is. Like, he has found this relationship in life, his second marriage, that for him is everything. Like, this is the thing, like the life that he's building with Davis, and that requires like sensitivity and caretaking and emotional intelligence, because he's with a finicky artist, because he's with someone who's going through all of this change at one time, and who's younger than him, right? And is
Yeah.
going through things that he hasn't gone through yet, but who also is just younger than him and sees the world through younger eyes. And so it brings up in him, yes, there's the desire and the lust and that part of their relationship, but he just genuinely loves this person, wants to protect them, wants to care for them, wants to do everything he can to make sure that their life is smooth and good and joyful. And that's what he cares about.
In every incarnation. I mean, he's perfect. I was trying to find this one quote that I just thought was, here it is. I thought this was so interesting. And I have to put my glasses on so I read it correctly because, hi, blind. He says, Everett and Davis are at dinner together. And Everett says to Davis, what are you thinking about? He says, he paused, pensive. I don't know what that feels like. And he said, what feels like? And now I'm cutting a little bit, but he said, Davis leaned in close as Everett picked up the pen. To be like, I'm just a man. What does that feel like? Everett shrugged and furrowed his brow. He glanced down to sign the check. It doesn't feel like anything really. I don't know. It just is. And I was like, that right there is the essence of who they both kind of are. I'm who I am. And there's no, I don't know, I'm just a man. And it's like, it's not complicated. I don't think about it. And so much is complicated for Davis. So to take all that in, I was like, that's an essence right there. I love that so much.
Thank you.
Really
That's one of
beautiful.
my favorite moments.
Oh my God, I love that. Yeah, but that is like the crystallization right there. First of all, it's like a drop of water in a bucket that's going to lead you forward, but it's also just an indication of who these two people are. The other person, going back to casting, that I thought, and he's straight, but just the physical manifestation of this guy. Do you know who David Cornsweet is?
Okay, not only do I know who he is, I've never met him, but fun fact, my very first job out of grad school, out of Sarah Lawrence, was actually as an admin assistant at the Juilliard School. And I worked for student affairs. And one of the more tedious parts of my job, because I also worked for Residence Life, is that students, when they would come into the dorm, they had to and sign in on these sheets of paper, just like signing in that they were there. And my job was to take those sign-in sheets and type them into the computer and into an Excel spreadsheet. I forget what something logins or logs or whatever. And it was like awful. It was the worst thing to do. And I didn't do them for many months. And then I had to take them home one weekend and like do a bunch of them. And it was like a total disaster. But the point is, I saw his name on those sheets all the time. And I was like, Corn Sweat.
I
That's like
know it's
such a
such a
cool
weird name.
name. And then I saw him on the Ryan Murphy show. Was it Hollywood?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
Where he was
yeah.
incredible. Yeah, he would be phenomenal. And he'd probably be the right age actually, because when you think about how long these things take to make,
Yeah, he's in his early 30s, but he's Superman.
yeah.
He's the new
Yes.
Superman.
Yes, he's Superman. And
Because
Everett is Superman in a way.
I mean, he is. He's perfect. I
Yeah,
don't even know what else to say.
no,
He's like
he's
everybody's dream. Like I was going through it and I was like, I couldn't even put a face to it. I could certainly put a body to it a lot, but I
mhm.
was like, who is this person? And I was sitting in the car this morning coming back from the bus stop and I was like, oh my God, it's kind of David Cornsweet.
Yes, he
So
would be
yeah.
phenomenal. I will say, I didn't know if I was going to talk about this much in my like conversations about the book, but it was really important to me when I started writing this book, like from jump, that I wanted to have again this character who, in sort of the traditional gay world, especially at that time, right, because I started this in 2011, especially at that
Mm,
time, was often like a real person like Davis would have been often told like, oh, you're great, but like I'm not into black guys. Oh, you're great, but I'm not into feminine guys. Like this person who just like from every angle is sort of systematically being told that they're not enough, that they're not desirable, that they're not wanted, is with the person that across every demographic everyone would want to sort of be with,
yeah.
and and is almost unaware of that, and again is that person is devoted to them. Like
Yeah.
that was a sort of political thing that I wanted to do with this book very early on.
But it's also the romance of it that you talked about. That is that okay, to make you see this can happen. You know,
Hmm.
this seemingly, I don't want to say Cinderella because it's not really glass slipper. That's not really the thing, but it is that a little bit of um aspirational, inspirational, and the dream of like, oh my God, it can happen. It
Yes,
also,
yes.
it does help but that Davis in his own person has so much going for him. You know, just the fact that he's this brilliant musician on the rise. I took this from the bottom. It might have been from the blur. This is almost a great place to wrap up. That it says, a story for anyone who feels they aren't worthy of love and they won't be seen for who they really are. And that really is a great encapsulation of what this story is. But I would also add, with a lot of family stuff thrown in there, with a
Yeah.
lot of baggage, to unpack as well.
Yes, because we all have it, right? It's all there. But I remember in 2016, I did a novel writing workshop at Tin House with Alexander
Mm.
Chi, who has become one of my great friends and mentors.
I'm
And
obsessed.
just, I mean, he is truly a godsend in so many ways, and for so many young writers. And at that time, I didn't know how the book was going to end. I knew how I wanted it to end in broad strokes, but I didn't
Yeah.
know what felt sort of more realistic and was more honest and more truthful. And Alexander Chi said to me, make the decision that's right for the book, but remember that our lives are not just pain and trauma, and it can't be just that. And that sort of gave me everything I needed to know, and it was so true. And from that point on, I began to understand what I wanted the book to do, how I wanted the book to operate for
Mm.
readers and for people. And in a world where genderqueer people are so threatened and under so much attack, especially when we're of color, like in very obviously
Yeah.
real ways right now,
Yeah.
it sort of feels like a balm that this book is coming out. But that was something that I wanted to really hone in on in this book, that like also we get to have the dream, whatever the dream is, whether the dream is meeting our professional goals, whether the dream is having a storybook romance, having someone who holds us at night or who loves us through the most challenging moments of our lives. Like, we are worthy of that too, and we deserve that too. And that does happen for us. It is not just trauma. It's not just pain. It's not just being attacked. It's not just, sort of ridiculous congressional representatives calling us names on the Senate floor. It is not just that. Our stories get to be full, and they get to include all of the experiences, all of the feelings, all of what it is to be human. I wanted this book to affirm that.
And it does. And I'm with you 100%. And I think it's more important now than ever. It's interesting because I was having a conversation with another trans writer yesterday, Emily St. James, and we were talking about, for me now, it's about, because like everything that you just said, it's about demystifying to me what's this narrative that's being put out, and doing exactly what you said, and showing these are just lives. They're individuals who have hopes and dreams and aspirations and want to be the most authentic they can be in their own life, and live honestly and fully, and love and live and fight. And so uh, I just need to say to you, congratulations. And I, I'm so happy for you. First of all, I'm so impressed with your success, because I just think it's all just great. But you're also, I speak by my word, which I said in the beginning, which I said you are the type of person that I know attracts so many people just on the wattage of who you are, and it's very evident. It's also just so great that you're as talented as you are charming, frankly. So
Thank you.
so, for all our viewers and our listeners, please get the book, get it on audio, or get the book, buy independent if you can. Support our indies. But Denne Michele Norris, thank you so much for being here. This was truly, truly a joy and a delight.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It was great to talk to you.